Hi, I'm Pastor Scott, and this is Extraordinary Connection, and I'm glad you're here. Do you know why Rome was so successful? What made the Roman Empire one of the greatest empires of all time? The first one was they were willing to let people do their thing for a long time during their history. So, local cultures, local religions, local customs, Rome allowed it. As long as you didn't disturb the peace, Rome didn't care. And you paid your taxes. That was important too. So Rome had a very lackadaisical attitude towards how the people of the Roman Empire lived their day to day life. As long as they didn't disrupt things, everything's good. The second was roads. Rome was master builders, and their engineers designed roads that have lasted till today. There are still Roman roads being used today. The roads were designed to keep water off of the road, to keep erosion down. The stones were cut to perfection, and they used and built those roads to move commerce and trade, to move communication and information, and to move the military from place to place. And it was because of that grand road system that they had that Rome was such a successful empire. Well, because they had those roads, they did move their military around quite a bit. And one of the practices was, it was a Roman law, was that if a soldier came across a regular citizen in the Roman Empire, they could conscript that person to carry their bags for them. And that person was bound to do it for 1 mile, 1 Roman mile, which is about a kilometer and a half today. And fun fact, that's where the idea of mile markers came from, was a way to mark that distance that somebody knew they had finished carrying that pack for the Roman soldier. So they would lay out those mile markers from mile to mile to mile, so they knew when somebody was done. So a regular citizen would be conscripted and would have to carry the pack of armor and food and extra clothes and sword and other materials, and it would be 40, 50 pounds worth of gear, and they'd have to carry it for a mile. And as you can imagine, it wasn't well received. The citizens, the general populace, didn't much like carrying the packs for the soldiers, but they didn't have a choice. They could grumble about it. Rome was okay with that as long as they did it. This is the stage of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. In the Sermon on the Mount, he says in Matthew 5:41, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. That's what he was talking about, was if a Roman soldier asks you to carry their pack, their equipment, and all their gear for 1 mile, you take it 2 miles. Which really meant for that person, it was a 4 mile trip because you got 2 miles there and 2 miles back. So it was a large ask to do on foot. Could eat up a whole afternoon. But Jesus said, do it anyway. You ever heard the phrase, kill them with kindness? That's what Jesus was asking them to do. We've forgotten the power of kindness. Instead of using kindness to change and soften hearts, to get our point across, we have turned to aggression and hostility and who can shout the loudest instead of who can get the quietest and who can outdo each other in love. Paul said, never get tired of doing what is good, and doing good is being kind. That's one of the fruit of the Spirit. It saddens me to watch these protests that are happening that start out with people expressing themselves, and that is good, but quickly de-evolve into hostility and to destruction and to pain and to violence. And some of these people that are going to these protests are carrying Christian flags and wearing Christian clothes and have Jesus written on the back of their shirt. They've forgotten the power of kindness. During the 1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. and the other leaders of the civil rights protests had their demonstrators practice what's called nonviolent resistance. If you watch the marches or the lunch counter sit-ins, the protesters were met with hostility and aggression and violence, physical and verbal violence. But the protesters were taught to not engage, to respond to that aggression directed at them only with kindness. They were taught to go the second mile instead of just the one. That's how we are going to change the world. Protesting is important, but we need to ensure, particularly those of us who are followers of Christ, that we are confronting evil with the power of love and the power of kindness. That we aren't getting swept up into the mob bent on destruction, but rather rise to the way of Christ and to use the power of kindness to bring the change we want to see in the world, and to have faith that the righteousness of God will prevail in the future, even if it seems such a distant dream today. And until next time, I'll see you at extraordinaryconnection.org.